So in this example, we're going to say that we're a teacher and we have a class of students and we want to keep track of their grades throughout the school year. So the first thing we need to figure out is, well, we've got students and we've got things that have grades like quizzes and tests and such. Which ones go in columns, which one go in rows? So I've put the students here in columns and I've put the items that they'll be graded on in rows. I've done this for several reasons. First, I've thought about the fact that pretty much the students remain fixed throughout the year. This is my class full of students. It's not going to change. I'm not going to add new ones. Sure, you may add one or two new ones at the beginning of the school year, or somebody may be removed. But in general, those things stay the same. So that gives me my first clue that those should be the columns. The items that they'll be graded on, they're going to continue to grow, so they act kind of as individual records. They're always going to be expanding. So that gives me a clue that those should be the rows. The other thing that gives me an idea of what should be columns and rows is that I'm probably going to want to total up their grades, right? I'm going to want to figure out each student's total grade, and that would go in a footer. And you have footer rows, but you don't have footer columns. So if these are all individual items here, adding them up here at the end, you don't really have the ability to add a footer column here at the right side. So it makes more sense to have that at the bottom in a footer row, which means that all the individual grading items would be in rows and all the students would be in columns. It can sometimes be difficult when you're starting a project to figure out what's in rows and columns. If you ever start something and you're playing around with it and you decide you've done it wrong, you can always go to Table, Transpose Rows and Columns, and it will switch everything like that. Now you can see the students going down, and you can see I'd have to add individual columns for every item, and this would get to be a really wide table. I'll undo to go back there. So now I want to compute the student's total grade. The problem is that not all of these things are weighted the same. Quizzes aren't as important as tests. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another column, and that's going to be the weight for the individual item. So I would have the states quiz and what the weight of that item is. So I want to add a column between A and B, and I want to make that a header column because it's not a record. It's not a student here, which is what the main body of this contains. So I don't want it to be just a regular column like that's a student. I want it to be a header column. There are two ways I could do this. One is I could insert a column between A and B and then make that a header column over here. Or I could just click here and then say add a header column after. That'll automatically add a column and make it a header column. And this will be my weights. So let's say I've got these four things that quizzes are worth 10% of the grade and tests are worth 40%. And that equals 100%. So now if I want to compute the total grade, I just need to do some multiplication. Let's create a footer row. And again, I could add an extra row there and then add a footer row, and it would turn that extra row into a footer. Or I could click here and I could add a footer row instead of adding a row. And that will automatically do both things. Add a row and make it a footer. And you can see it actually even changed the number there to 1. So now let's calculate a grade. The way I would do that is I would hit the equals key to start a formula. I would take that student's grade and then multiply it by how much it's worth. Then add this grade, multiply it by how much that's worth. This grade times this, and this grade times that. So now I get 4 groups here, multiplying each grade by how much it's worth. And I get that student's grade. Now I should be able to copy that and paste it here to get this student's grade, except that what's going to happen is everything's going to move over. So instead of being these 4 and these 4, it's going to be these 4 and these 4, which won't be correct. I don't want to multiply this student's grade by this student's grade to get a result. I need this column to stay static. I want it to stay on column B. So I'm going to go into this formula and I'm going to edit it. And everywhere I see column B, I'm going to make sure that I've set it to be absolute. Now previously this would be something I need to set because otherwise it would move over. But because this was a header column, numbers automatically assumed I wanted to preserve the column. So all of these are already preserved. You can tell by the $ there in the formula. So that means that I can actually copy from here and paste here, and you can see this is multiplying these 4 by these 4, and that's the proper way to get the grade. So I can now select all of the footer cells, paste it in, and I get each student's grade going all the way across. Here's the problem with that. I'm adding up to 100% here for these 4 items, and that's great if that's all I'm going to be doing for the entire year. So I've given the students these 4 grades here. I make the spreadsheet. I've computed their grade. I'm done. But that's probably not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is I'm going to be adding each one of these as the school year goes on, and I'm going to want to add another one after the president's test and another one after that and continue to add them. And I don't know how much each one's going to be worth, really. I can't say that something is worth 10% of the grade because maybe I don't know how many tests I'm going to get to give them, how well the school year plays out. So I'm going to want to do something else besides doing a hard percentage here of the grade that will work to calculate their grade, and I can continue to add new quizzes and tests and other things to this, and it will still equal 100% when everything is multiplied and added together. So the first step I want to do is I want to find a way to do this formula without having to have another product in here. So I've got 4 different products because there are 4 different rows. I don't want to have to add a new one each time. Is there a formula that will help me do this? And it turns out there is. I'm going to erase this this function here completely, and I'm going to use something called sum product. What is sum product? Well, if you look it up here, you could read about it, and what it does is it returns the sum of the products of corresponding numbers in one or more collections. So this would be a collection here, and this would be a collection here. The collections need to be equivalent. 4 items and 4 items. And the idea is that it takes the first item from the first collection and multiplies it by the second, or the first item in the second collection, and does that for all of them and then sums them. So it's the sum of products. How did I find this function? Well, I found it by searching. I thought there should be a function maybe that does this, and I searched for various things. Here, I looked for sum, and I looked at some of these different things, and I've read their descriptions, and I found out that there is a function for this. The same thing is probably going to happen to you. You're going to be working on something, and you're thinking, there's got to be a better way to do this. Let me go and look through the functions and see if there's something I can use to accomplish this. So I didn't know that sum product existed when I first made this example up. I just thought there should be a better way to do this that I should be showing, and sure enough, after spending just a few minutes looking through some functions, I was able to find this and see that it worked. And I'm going to get exactly the same result here, and you can even see that it did indeed preserve the column there, and did that for the start and the end of this. So from B2 to B5 it did it. Now I could do something a little different here. I could, instead of doing a range like that, I could say I want the entire column B and entire column C. And I can go into here and say preserve this column. So it didn't automatically get it for me, which is why it's important to check each time. And I'm still going to get the same result here. And if I copy and I paste that here, you can see it's doing column B times column D. I can paste it there. I'm always going to get the same result. So I can paste that throughout all of the different ones. And you can see it's a much easier formula there to look at. And it doesn't matter that I've got 4 rows there. If I were to add a new row, it would get that row as well. So if I go and add another row and call this homework 1 and say that's worth 10% of the grade, and then I add something in here like that student got an 80% on that, you can see it changes this. It adds this in. Now I have above 100%. Why? Well, because these now add up to 110%. So they have 100.6% out of 110%, which isn't what I want, but at least the sum of the products is working, and by adding a new row I didn't have to redo this formula at all in order for that new row to be counted in. So it will work a lot better here in column B is not to use percentages but to use weights. And if you're a teacher you probably already know this. So you assign a weight like 1. Let's actually delete all of these and I'll put a regular number so it's not going to count as a percent. A 1 weight for a quiz, 4 times that for a test, another quiz, another test. Let's say the homework is worth 2, so it's worth twice what a quiz is worth. And our formula still works out really well here because it's still doing the sum of the products, and it's giving us a 10.86, and it's a 10.86 out of 12 because these add up to 12, which is great, but we don't want 10.86. That doesn't get us anything. What we want is a percentage. So we could say, all right, so this is what the total is of the percentage of how they did on the quiz or test or homework times the weight. If we were to divide that by the sum of all of the weights, so in other words the best, if the student would get 100%, so we can do sum of B here, then we get the grade. So in this case 0.905. I could go into cell here, change the data format to number. Let's actually change it to percentage, and now we get 90.5%. And I could go in here and let's make sure that B is absolute, preserved column. Yeah, so we want to make sure we check that. So now when I copy and paste it here, it will do for this column and this column. And we get an odd percent here, which is not pleasant to look at. So let's select these two here and say in percentage we'll do decimals automatic. Let's change that to 2 decimal places for everybody. Now it looks a little bit better. Or since this is grades, we could just do 0. And that's probably fine to look at. Now I could copy and paste this throughout the entire thing, and I get everything correctly multiplied out. It's all 5 weights, all 5 grades. Now everybody's got zeros here for these, so everybody's grade is going to be really low. So I'm going to want to add grades in for these in order for the percentages to be valid. So let's say that we'll just give everybody an 80 for this homework. I'll copy and then I'll just paste in this entire range here. And now the grades look a little bit better. I can add something else. Mark 2, I can say that's worth 1 point, 90%, 95%. It's easier if I actually enter the percent in, but I could always set the cell format to percentage for all of these and then just be able to enter the number in. So let's just give everybody else 85%. Here I'll copy and paste. And now we can kind of work on how this table looks. So it's really hard to scroll across here to see everybody. Let's shrink things down a bit. I'm going to go to this column here and I'm going to fit with content to shrink things a bit. I can shrink this quite a bit here. Let me just say weight there. All these students, I want to have it an equal width for all of them. So I'm going to select the first column, click to select the last one, and then shrink them down quite a bit. Continue to just shrink it down and grab any of these since they're all together and bring them closer. Or I could go into table and do the row and column size, I can change the width. Let me change it to 0.5 inches for everybody. So it kind of wraps their names around a bit, but at least I can more easily see the entire class here now. I don't like how the footer here doesn't look too different from the rest. It's just bold. I'm going to select the entire row there, and I can change how this looks. I'll go to Cell, and I'll go to Fill and give it a color fill. And so it's a gray color, and I can change which gray it is, make it a little bit darker, for instance. I also like to use some conditional highlighting. These are just a wall of numbers here, but what I want to see is when a student is failing. So I'm going to select all of this here, all of the cells and all of the rows of the body here, and go to Organize and Format, and do conditional highlighting under Cell. Add a rule and say when a number is less than, let's say less than or equal to 0.7, because they're percentages, then do a red fill. So now I'm going to get an indication of when a student has failed a test or quiz or something. I could do the same thing here for these. So I'm going to select the complete grades here, and I'm going to add some conditional highlighting for them. I'm going to keep the fill there, so I'm going to say when it's less than or equal to 0.7, not do a red fill, but let's make the text red. So now if a student is failing, we would see it. So let's the student seems to already be in trouble, so let's give them a much lower grade here, and you can see now we get an indication that that student is failing. I'd also love to see when a grade is missing. That's something that really is common. So I'm going to select all of these, show the highlighting rules again, and add a new rule here. And this rule is going to be when a cell is blank, and I'll set it to something I can really notice, like maybe blue. And that way, if a grade is missing for a student, you can see it changes to red. Why? Because rule 1 activates first. If I switch these and say, okay, if it's blank, change it to blue, done. If it's not blank, then continue on and say if it's less than 0.7, then change it to red. So I can see easily here when somebody is missing a grade, which is very important, and you can get the student to turn that homework in or decide that they're not going to and assign them a 0 or something like that. The other thing I could do is when this gets really long, it might be just hard to read these numbers here. So I like the idea of doing a alternating row color there to make it easier to see. Once I have that, I don't really need the lines. So I'll go in here. I'll select all of this. So I'll go to Cell, and then I will say, okay, I just want everything in the interior here. So not this, but all of the lines in the interior, like that, and change the border to no border. And now you can see it gets rid of the grid lines in there. It actually looks a lot nicer, a lot smoother in there to be able to see the grades. Another thing I may want to do is filter this table. So for instance, say I just want to concentrate on the big grades, see how they did on the tests. So I go to Organize, Filter, and I can add a filter here for column B, which is weight, now since it's called that, and say if it's greater than or equal to 4. And when I do that, I only see things that have 4 or higher weight. So it allows me, when this is, say, 70 different items long, I could focus on how the students did on the test. I could also just say it's equal to 4 or something like that. I could even add another column and give it not only an item name like states test, but what type of thing is it? Test, quiz, homework, whatever, and then filter by that specific name. And I could switch this filter off but leave it in place for me to use later on. You could also hide things, manually. Like for instance, say I'm meeting with a student's parents and I want to show them all the students' grades. I don't want the parents to be able to see everybody else's grades. So what would be nice to do is hide everybody else. So I'm going to select the first column there, select the last column with the Shift key held down. Now I've selected all the columns. But I'm going to hold the Command key down and deselect this column. Now I can click on any one of these and select Hide Selected Columns, and it hides everybody but that one student. So I can focus on them. And then I could go to Table, unhide all columns to get everybody back. So what about sorting? There's not too much you would want to do normally for sorting here. You could sort on column B to put like the lowest weight things at the top or the highest weight things at the top. You could add another column here for date. So you could have a date for each item there and then sort by that. But typically you're not going to want to sort rows here. What you might want to do is sort the columns so that the students with the best grades are first and the worst grades are last. That way you could focus on maybe the students that are failing and see them in a little easier way. But there's no way to sort columns. So we'll create another table and handle that with another table. And the way we'll do that is I'll click on Table here and I'll create a new table that will appear underneath. I'm only going to need the header and one row there. I'm going to go here and put a formula where I say equals and then just click on the first student's name here. And now that's that first student. And I could actually do it the same for this student here. So I'll just do equals and this student. Let me shrink this table down here. Now I've got these two formulas in place. If I expand, it's going to automatically do the next one and the next one and the next one. So that's really good. But before I do that, let me go and say I want the student's grade there. So I'll just do equals and then just click on the grade. I'll do it for these three. So it's just basically copying the, you can see it right here, copying the student's name, copying the student's grade, name, grade. And if I expand the table, it will just continue to do that all the way through. And you can see it just does it through the end there. And then this one doesn't make sense because it's missing that column. So I don't need that one row there. I can delete it. I'll delete the formula in it and then move it over. So now I've basically got a duplicate of this table missing everything in the middle. What I can do with this duplicate is I can select it and use what I showed you before, transpose rows and columns, and it will do that. It will basically put the names vertically with the grades next to them, but the formulas still match. So the formulas are still linked to this. Now with this table I can click here and say sort descending, and now I get the top grade there and the bottom grade here. So it will change with everything. So if I say take this top student and let's say they did even better on their test here, you can see it upgrades. Oh, I did percent. Okay, now you can see it upgrades to 92%. So it's still going to do that. What if it changes the order though? So let's look. Here's Hannah with 84%. It's right there. Let's say she did much better on that president's test than that 83%. Let's say she got 99%. You can see she's out of order now. So you're going to have to resort this table. Or you could go to Organize, Sort, and say you want to sort the entire table by B. And let's do descending. So now Hannah is there. Let's go and give Hannah back her mediocre grade on that test. You can see it changes it there. Now I could just go and say for this table, I click it, I can say sort now, and it'll resort by this amount. So you do have to trigger that sort, but at least you don't have to pick what it is again. You can just go to this Organize, Sort and do Sort Now to correct it. So this helps out a lot to have this extra table here so you can see what students at the bottom there, and give more attention to those students, give accolades to the students at the top using this second table trick.